Can everybody see that okay? Awesome. And again, as Suzanne said, please feel free to ask questions along the way. This really is, it's supposed to be more fun and more relaxed than an actual presentation. So I'm very okay answering questions along the way. Michelle and Suzanne are going to keep track of that for me in the chat. So be active. And with that, I'm going to jump into the presentation. Again, Kilowatt Events is a full service event operations production company that specializes in frequently televised events. One is the sustainability arm, and we really focus on tackling environmental footprints and social impacts of our often temporary experiences. And when about what we use to power event sustainability, we really are talking about what we refer to as our roadmap. It's a systems thinking approach. We have 6 phases that from start of design through implementation of our program that we're going to do today in the next few minutes. And again, it's a systems thinking approach, and it's really designed to be strategic and results driven so that we're maximizing our value in what we're doing. So step 1 is establish a legacy. And the first to admit that I don't think events alone are going to save the world, but I do know that events and sustainability at events in particular has this amazing quality of being able to shift public perception, change status, really bring people together from dozens of different industries and people from different backgrounds. And that it's quite an audience. And I think that that is something that we're going to need to save the world. So in our first phase, establishing a legacy, it's really taking everybody that I just mentioned and all of the stakeholders and thinking about what everybody's vision is and bringing that together. It's the foundation for what is going to set the pace for the 5 steps after this. We want to understand the vision for the event and for ourselves, but we also want to be looking at stakeholders from the community and from other event operators that are, if it's a larger event, other companies as well. We want this to be a collaborative process. And the potential sustainability initiatives are endless. So I'll run through a few here, but these are really more of examples. And this just reiterates the number of examples there are, just reiterates again how important this step is, because you could jump down a lot of rabbit holes with trying to choose your initiatives. And so if they're all focused by what your overall vision is or your overall legacy is, then it's just going to be that much more impactful. And some of you, I guess to note, some of you have heard of a materiality assessment. This is really what establishing a legacy is, or looking at your vision. Materiality assessments are something that a lot of larger corporations use. They're super helpful in the event industry, as we're all pretty aware. Something like this could be a lot more on the fly, but even if it's done just a little bit to establish where you're heading, it's, I think, a really important step. So if we look at some of the examples here, for going through this first example, some of the cities, especially in California, is a styrofoam ban or a single-use plastics ban. And we've done this at events in the past where we wanted one of our be that we were going to help the city really establish what diversion expectations were with these new policies. And so in this first, are you guys able to see my cursor? Awesome. So in this first example, we're establishing a bar for landfill diversion expectations. The associated behavior change that we're hoping to get out of that, which is a part of the legacy, is improving waste sorting habits. And you're going to see this supported by on-site operations, whether that be attendee education, whether that be on-site sorting operations that are front of house or back of house. And so all of it to flow into place, starting with operations, leading through your legacy and your behavior change. For something like carbon emissions, it's similar, but for the operations, if we're using renewable diesel on site, the legacy here is that we're really hoping to eventually achieve net zero emissions. And the behavior change more specifically is maybe we're having attendees focus more on renewable power. For our last example and the third example, the legacy is that if we're wanting to look at a circular economy, for that strategy, we may be looking at different types of nonprofits that are activating on site, maybe looking into what a circular economy in an industry looks like, whether that be the music industry, whether that be a sports industry. And so the long-term behavior change, hopefully both from attendees and from staff on site, is that you're looking at what are more sustainable purchasing options for your day-to-day life or at the event. It all kind of starts to flow together. And again, these are examples of endless options that you could choose from. Moving into our second step, goals and KPIs. You're going to notice similar photos here and similar concepts. It's because it's very connected to that first step of establishing a legacy. It's setting goals and you're setting your key performance indicators. And maybe going all the way back to school, or maybe once you hit your professional, heard about SMART goals. That's what we want to make them to be specific. We want them to be measurable and we want them to be attainable. So the more specific, the better. So if you look at the 3 impact categories we just looked at before, for establishing a legacy, for our landfill diversion goal, our goal from, and this is one that we often get at a lot of our events, we did in the year before. That's great. That is a goal. It's something that we operate on a lot, especially in some of our newer programs. But if we wanted to really up the ante on something like this, we could make it more specific by saying we want to increase by 25% of the previous year. And so that would be, when you look then at your KPIs, it's what you are specifically measuring. Percent landfill waste to total waste, or your total tons of waste recovered for material or food donation. Similarly for carbon, if we're making an overall goal that we want to decrease our per capita carbon emissions from our previous year, great goal. We also could make it more specific by saying that we want this goal to be, we want to decrease our emissions by 30% by 2025. So that's actually 2025 is the year that for a lot of our own personal internal goals at Kilowatt we use. KPIs for this are, a lot of times it's percent renewable power by total consumption, or it's also what are your scope 1 and 2 emissions based on the amount of your attendance. There are several others, but I would definitely recommend keeping these your KPIs short and sweet, to the point, because it does take time to track all of this. And so you don't want that to be the reason that you're not setting these goals. 1 or 2 KPIs per area that you're measuring is going to be very sufficient in helping you make sure that you're staying on track. If you have any questions, I know I just dropped a lot of information in these first few slides. So if you do have any questions, make sure that you're using that chat. For our third step is analyzing resources. And this is really where the fun of this comes in, because you're starting to be able to collaborate with other people outside of just your own sustainability operation. This really is, at the end of the day, you're looking at understanding what resources are available to you to advance your goals and your KPIs. At a large music festival, that's going to be a lot different from even just a food and beverage standpoint than something like a red carpet. And so that's why this step is important, because if you just plan, as we know, if we're all in events, we'll kind of understand that, but it does translate to sustainability as well, that it's going to be different for every event. This is going to apply to not just physical, tangible resources. It's also, almost even more importantly, going to apply to communication. So sustainability should not operate in a silo. It can, but it's definitely not the most impactful and most well-used way of using sustainability. So you want to be collaboratively working with any of these internal stakeholders, external stakeholders. They're all going to be helpful in both communication and in physical resources. But the critical piece to all of this is lead time. I cannot exaggerate early planning enough, because if you come in too late in the game, sometimes it is difficult to change things like procurement, which is going to then roll downhill to your waste management strategy. So the earlier you can plan, the more productive you're going to be across the board. The fourth phase, community engagement, very similar to the last, but equally important. It's critical to work within the community to see who it is that you can collaborate with. It's how we produce our largest benefit. For example, if you're working with a university or maybe a nonprofit, outside of just operations, that's going to have a huge influx of energy and a huge influx of passion into your program. But you're also, especially if you're having a chance to offer experience and training for some of these emerging sustainability leaders. and I actually just had this happen at an event this year. Sometimes it's the small community impacts that really go the farthest. We had an event where we had an artist on site who was doing upcycled art. And one of the coolest, I'm like getting chills just thinking about it now, but one of the coolest things we had happen at that event from that program, I think, is that a high schooler's mom called, got in touch with a local skate shop that we were working with. And because we were marketing what was happening on site with the upcycled skateboard art, and that student ended up coming on site and learning how to work. He was already an artist, already a huge fan of skateboarding, and ended up getting connected with an artist who is doing a lot of upcycled artwork. And so now that student he's already been working with him since the event on doing upcycled art, they're collaborating on some skateboard ideas. And so even seemingly minor things like that can really end up having a large impact. Project funding, our fifth phase in the approach, is really just about how, at the end of the day, we also want to do well by doing good. And you can get creative with this. I could have a whole separate presentation on each of these items, but essentially there are a lot of different ways to fund a sustainability program. And kind of going back to community collaboration, internal and external operational collaboration, the more that you can bring people on board, even if it is only financially by $1, people feel like they're more part of the process. And overall, you're going to have a more successful event, the more people that you have bought into this. But I will say, I'll follow this up. You'll notice a trend: early planning. Lead time is super important with things like this, because if you're potentially going to be working with support from attendee ticket sales or vendors, you're going to be much more successful 6 to 8 months out from your event versus trying to implement something a month out. Last step, I think the most important is our implementation and reporting phase. I think outside of actual on-site implementation, our reports are one of the most valuable things that we provide our clients at Kilowatt One or with Kilowatt One. For every single event, we collect and analyze data, and we collaborate it or combine it into a post-event report. And so for things like this, it really is going to provide the insight for how you can do better, and going all the way back to that first and second step of establishing your goals and measuring. This is kind of wrapping it all up into that first step so that you can improve upon next year. With this and with Kilowatt One, we do strongly believe in transparency. So even if there is something that doesn't go necessarily plan, and I have thoughts on this that I'll share later as well, but I really do think that transparency is important, and sharing things that need to be changed for next time, that didn't go how you thought they would, because that's really where we're going to have the largest progress made and where we'll be able to see the biggest impacts had. So at the end of the day, it really is, from running through all of these 6 phases, it's mindful actions that are going to lead to your process improvement. And with that, we will jump into question and answers.
Yeah, there was, this is Suzanne. I'm just going to go back through the chat. People want to know if the recording and the video will be, the recording and the slides will be available.
I don't have an answer for that yet. I'm sorry, you guys. I'll figure that out ASAP.
Okay. And then there's a lot in the chat about the lead time. I know I put something in there, David Muller. You know, we often have 2-3 weeks, 1 week lead time. So it's really challenging that's a big pain point of ours. And then also someone mentioned about universities. Katie was talking about, that they are still trying to decide venues when their event is this Friday. Al also is talking about that lead times keep changing, and it's not just materials, but the lack of skilled and trained people for production to install and dismantle the labor at events. So clients need to plan way ahead of what normally they've done in the past. So that's what's been going on in the chat.
Awesome. I think that we can all relate to everything that was just mentioned by Suzanne. COVID especially has really been rocking the planning time in not a great way for being able to do implement even the event, let alone do sustainability on top of it, especially for events that it's not built into their regular protocol. And so really anything you can do, I will say that I have leaning on the community has actually been very helpful this year, because they're the ones who are, they know the most about what's going on in your area, what's going on in your venue. I've had several contacts at the events this year that really came through from the community and sped up that planning process. It's really just about asking for what help. And that goes back to kind of what I said before about what's not going right. Don't be afraid to say, hey, this is what I want to do, but I have no idea how to do it. Or do you have any suggestions for what we can do to make even part of this happen? Because you'd really be surprised how quickly local contacts can help.